At dawn on April 14, 1944, the Italian valley lay quiet under a low ceiling of fog, the kind that swallowed sound and distance and turned movement into rumor. The 88th Infantry Division had learned to fear mornings like this. German reconnaissance favored fog. It concealed approach, blurred silhouettes, and gave scout cars the freedom to probe American lines without immediate punishment. The vehicle Harper waited for was the SD-KFZ 222, a four-wheeled armored scout car armed with a 20mm autocannon. It was not meant to fight pitched battles. Its job was simpler and deadlier. It appeared suddenly, fired just enough to panic defenders, marked positions, then vanished before American weapons could respond. What followed hours or days later was artillery or a coordinated assault. Men did not die when the scout cars came. They died afterward, when the Germans returned knowing exactly where to strike. Official doctrine was clear. Light armor was to be countered with bazookas, mines, anti-tank rifles, or coordinated fire. On paper, the solutions were neat and effective. On the ground, in the hills of Italy, they were fantasies. The 88th Division was stretched thin, under-equipped, and fighting uphill against a veteran enemy. Bazookas were scarce, mines were hoarded for planned defenses, and resupply promises dissolved in the same fog that hid the German patrols. Harper was not an officer. He was not a strategist. He was a soldier who counted bodies. In 6 weeks, 47 men in his sector had been killed by scout cars doing reconnaissance, not combat. Sergeant John McDonald died reaching for a grenade he never threw. Corporal Rafael Gonzalez was cut down in the open, his pockets still holding cigarettes he had been sharing moments earlier. Each death followed the same pattern. The car appeared. It fired. It withdrew. Orders came down to hold position and wait. Harper listened to those orders while watching men bleed into Italian soil for reasons that felt less like necessity and more like bureaucracy. Battalion command insisted on posture and patience. Captain Erickson promised proper weapons soon. Harper suggested a simple countermeasure. Wires stretched low across roads to catch axles and flip vehicles. The response was immediate and firm. Unauthorized. Dangerous. Risky to friendly troops. The answer was no. Doctrine did not allow improvisation, and discipline mattered more than ideas. Harper saluted, walked away, and decided that discipline meant nothing if it kept getting men killed. Harper's background offered no heroic mythology, only habits of mind shaped by necessity. He grew up in Chicago, the son of a factory worker who understood systems because his survival depended on them. Machines did not fail randomly. They failed because stress found weak points. Harper learned early that rules described ideal conditions, not real ones. As a teenager apprenticed as a railroad switchman, he saw how a single overlooked detail could cascade into catastrophe. A misaligned switch did not just derail one car. It destroyed schedules, cargo, livelihoods. Fixes were rarely elegant. They were practical, improvised, and sometimes unofficial. When Harper enlisted in January 1943, the recruiter promised training, equipment, and purpose. Only the boat ride across the Atlantic turned out to be true. Italy was not the fast, glorious campaign many had imagined. It was slow, grinding, and intimate. Every ridge had to be taken twice. Every village cost lives. The enemy was disciplined and patient, and their reconnaissance was relentless. Harper began to see the scout cars not as machines, but as patterns. They always used the same roads. They always kept speed. They always trusted their armor. Doctrine told American soldiers to fear them unless properly equipped. Harper questioned why fear was the only option. After Captain Erickson dismissed his proposal, Harper waited 10 days. In that time, 2 more men died. On the night of March 10th, the waiting ended. Without orders, witnesses, or permission, Harper moved to the supply dump under cover of darkness. He took wire and shovels, knowing that theft from army stores could carry severe punishment. He also knew that punishment meant nothing to men already dead. The night was cold, the ground heavy with mud. Artillery echoed in the distance, a reminder that discovery by a German patrol would mean capture or execution. Harper chose a narrow stretch of road between oak trees, where visibility favored American positions and constrained the Germans. He drove the first shovel into the earth at an angle, then the second 8 feet away, measuring by pacing in darkness. He wrapped the wire 3 times around each anchor point, pulling until his hands burned and bled. He set the height carefully, 14 inches, measured from a destroyed scout car weeks earlier. Too high, and it would ride under the axle. Too low and it would snap. He tested the tension until the wire sang. At 1:15 a.m., Harper crawled back to his position, soaked, shaking, and fully aware that if discovered, he would face court-martial. No one knew what he had done. The valley returned to silence. The German scout car appeared at 6:43 a.m., right on schedule. Harper heard it before he saw it, the distinctive grind of its engine cutting through fog. Routine patrol. No urgency. The Germans had learned that American lines in this sector posed little threat to armored reconnaissance. At 600 yards, the car emerged as a ghostly shape, the commander standing partially exposed, binoculars raised, the gunner lazily traversing the autocannon. At 400 yards, Harper's mouth went dry. His hands trembled despite himself. This was no longer theory or anger. This was consequence. If the wire failed, the car would spot the position, call in fire, and men would die. Worse, the Germans might notice the wire and trace it back, discovering the unauthorized trap and punishing the entire unit. At 300 yards, memories crowded in. McDonald, Gonzalez, faces that should not have been dead. Harper realized he no longer cared about his own fate. He cared only that the pattern end. At 200 yards, the scout car accelerated slightly, wheels spinning through mud. 50 yards remained. The wire lay invisible in the fog, silent and waiting. The front wheels struck it at speed. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the wire bit. It caught the axle cleanly, tension holding just long enough. The car's forward momentum did the rest. The front end lifted, the rear twisted, and the vehicle flipped violently onto its side, then its roof. The autocannon fired once into the fog, a wild, useless burst. German voices shouted, disoriented and panicked. American rifles opened fire almost immediately. The engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. When it ended, the scout car burned quietly on the road, smoke curling upward into thinning mist. 2 Germans were dead. One was captured, stunned and bleeding. No American was hurt. For the first time in weeks, reconnaissance had not escaped. Word spread quickly through the company, then the battalion. Officers arrived, examined the wreckage, measured the wire height, and said little. Officially, no one admitted responsibility. Unofficially, everyone knew. Captain Erickson did not order Harper arrested. Instead, he stared at the overturned vehicle for a long time before walking away. Within days, low-wire obstacles began appearing on roads throughout the sector, this time sanctioned, measured, and documented. Reports moved up the chain of command, careful to frame the innovation as a field-expedient adaptation rather than insubordination. Doctrine did not change overnight, but practice did. Scout car losses increased. German patrols became cautious. American casualties from reconnaissance dropped sharply. Harper never received a medal for what he did. He also never faced the court-martial he had expected. The incident was quietly absorbed into the machinery of war, stripped of personal authorship and redistributed as collective learning. That was how armies preserved both discipline and survival. The wire trap did not win the Italian campaign, but it saved lives in one valley and altered behavior on both sides of the line. German reconnaissance units began sending infantry ahead to check roads, slowing their tempo. American units gained time, warning, and confidence. Harper returned to being a name on a roster, another soldier carrying a rifle through mud and hills. The anger that had driven him did not disappear, but it settled into something steadier. He understood now that doctrine was not sacred. It was provisional, written far from where men actually died. After the war, historians would write about Italy as a campaign of attrition, of slow advances and hard lessons. They would focus on divisions, commanders, and operations. Harper's wire would merit at most a footnote, if that. Yet the truth of the moment mattered more than recognition. In that 90 seconds, a single soldier applied a lifetime of practical thinking to a problem that regulations had failed to solve. He saw a system failing and introduced a correction, not because he was brave in the romantic sense, but because he could not tolerate waste. Years later, veterans of the 88th would remember the scout cars less as unstoppable threats and more as something that could be beaten with thought as much as firepower. Harper survived the war. He returned to civilian life, to systems and machines that broke in predictable ways. He rarely spoke about Italy. When he did not frame his story as defiance or heroism. He framed it as responsibility. Men had died because solutions were delayed by paperwork and fear of deviation. He chose to deviate. History often turns on such quiet choices, made by people with no authority beyond their own conscience. The wire in that valley did not flip military doctrine in textbooks, but it shifted reality on the ground, which mattered more. War is remembered through battles and dates, but it is lived through moments like that morning, when fog lifts, engines approach, and someone decides that rules written elsewhere no longer apply. In those moments, survival depends not on permission, but on understanding how things really work.